Welcome back to the most accurate podcast here at 4for4 Football. As always, I am your host, John Daigle, and a very special guest today, just 3 weeks ahead of the NFL draft. Good friend in life, someone who swears he had a scuba diving trip booked to Malaysia before he won $2 million. And of course, the winner of Best Ball Mania 3, none other than legendary Upside's own Pat Kerrane. Pat, what I want to actually ask you first is, what was the biggest hangup in creating your own business after spinning off from NBC and Roto World? Because I would imagine, having seen your thumbnail creations in the past, there had to be at least some issues ahead of building your own company.
Yeah, well, it's all the visual stuff. So I had a guy working for me to develop some of the graphics and everything that I'm using, various logos and all of that. And I'm still, because I do kind of have a taste for this sort of thing, but I just can't do it all. So like, I'm aware that the thumbnails I create look terrible. I just can't do better. So if someone else was making them, I'd have a lot of notes. And that's kind of, that process has been ongoing. So if you've noticed, careful observers will note that the logos have sort of slightly changed over time as I've sent out newsletter posts, because I'm kind of adjusting as we go. But also, like the YouTube thumbnails, I do think it's going to be an ongoing problem. If you're a YouTube thumbnail creator, get in touch because I'm still worried about how that's going to go.
Is there anything else you outsourced at the start? Because as you mentioned, that's really just the story of life. That's why athletes have professional chefs. Like, all we're trying to do in life is cut out those decisions to make those decisions easier. Hence, like, meal prep at the beginning of the week for an everyday person, because you want to eat healthy. And the quickest way to do that is to have the healthy food available. The moment you look in the fridge, you can take that decision away from eating anything else. So is there anything else you outsourced when starting Legendary Upside?
Not a ton. I used to do a lot of audio editing, podcast editing and stuff. So I'm very comfortable with that. So like editing the premium podcast that I put out and the regular podcast is all pretty like second nature for me. So that I didn't have to outsource that. I actually did kind of build the back end of the site. It's like using a template. I didn't like create. I don't know how to build real. But like I talked to JJ Zacharyson, he actually built his own site. It's like a legit website that he built because he knows how to build websites. So I am jealous of that, and maybe eventually I'll outsource some more slick designs. But no, I didn't really. I have some editing help, which has been really, really great, because I make like probably 3 stupid errors a post. So those are getting caught now. But so far, I'm gonna have some help on the best ball rankings that I'm launching post draft. So that'll be just kind of helping make sure they never get stale. But and pretty much right now it's me doing everything but graphical stuff.
And I'm glad you mentioned rankings, because that is why you are here. Right now, featured on Legendary Upside are your Superflex and TE-Premium rookie rankings and tiers. And I want to dive in immediately on this first tier, because Bijan Robinson leads the way as the #1 overall player in the first tier. And then the rest of the way, 3 quarterbacks: Anthony Richardson, Bryce Young, and CJ Stroud. And let's start at the top here, because I don't think it should be necessarily locked in Superflex leagues that Bijan should go ahead at the 101 of any quarterback, if only because I think you should have context in your roster. Like, if you have the 101 because you have no quarterback at all, that's how you got there from the beginning of aging veterans, I do think Anthony Richardson should be on the table at 101 over Bijan. So in your rankings, in your thoughts, are you giving any leeway for different roster builds, or do you think lockstep Bijan is the 101 in these type of drafts?
Even in that scenario, I lean Bijan as the 101, because when you look at the running back landscape, now you are taking some risk by drafting a running back, because, Bijan tears his ACL or something, and, he loses a lot of value theoretically. Although Breece Hall just tore his ACL and it still maintains a ton of value. So I think if you look at like the overall running back landscape of who people even want to trade for, right? They don't want to trade for Christian McCaffrey, who's the top running back in drafts right now in redraft, because he's getting older. They don't want to trade for Saquon Barkley, who's on the 1-2 turn. They don't want to, like, Jonathan Taylor feels a little less safe than he used to. Austin Eckler might be his last year of major relevance. So like the top running backs outside of Bijan Robinson, who's going at the 1-2 turn in redraft, are a little scary in dynasty leagues. I think you are potentially in a situation, like Breece Hall, I'm very, very optimistic on coming back from the ACL tear. Everything's been good, but that could be a really bad take. It's an ACL. Like, we never know. Like, these things can take a long time to recover from sometimes. So even him, heading into 2024, are we feeling that good about Breece Hall? So yeah, I think that Bijan presents an opportunity to have like the clear cut RB1 next year with like almost like 2 tiers down to the next running back who you'd even want to trade for. And the ability to, at that point, move off of him for someone who you feel like is a little bit more locked in than Anthony Richardson or has more of a ceiling than Bryce Young or CJ Stroud. So I just think the running back landscape, given how safe Bijan Robinson is looking at his profile, I think Davis Maddock was saying he's kind of a meme right now, and the meme players kind of tend to hold their value more. It's like a weird thing to think through, but in Dynasty, like, it's a market-based game, and the market is nuts for Bijan Robinson. So they're not going to completely lose all that enthusiasm after one season. So I think you're probably, like, if your goal is to get an awesome quarterback for 2024, it still might be Bijan Robinson, and you're going to be able to move off him sometime in the next, 18 months for a really good quarterback.
Breece Hall, as you mentioned, was the ADP 15 overall in the big board draft before they ended. And although torn ACLs are all different, it matters about the age of the player. It matters about when the ACL was suffered. It matters about the recovery timeline, what kind of ACL. Like, I understand all that, but we do know that historically running backs have averaged 6.1 fewer carries per game and negative 2.5 fewer yards per attempt following an ACL tear compared to their weekly usage prior to injury. So not something, in my opinion, we still want to bet on at an ADP for Breece Hall in the big board or in the Superflex drafts on Underdog right now. And you're seeing that notion hammered on Javonte Williams, who, to his point, did have a more extensive torn ACL than Breece Hall. I also want to talk about the quarterbacks here, though, because what we're seeing now is Anthony Richardson as your QB1. And I completely agree, since he is, in my opinion, the birth child of Trey Lance and Josh Allen. Uber athletic, but also just 455 career dropbacks at Florida.
There's some Cam Newton in there, I think, maybe, too.
That's true, absolutely, because of the size and the rushing ability. At the same time, though, we're not expecting him to be a top 2 pick, right? We still universally, all sports books, have CJ Stroud and Bryce Young in whatever order. But because of his attributes, I believe, you do have Anthony Richardson as your QB1 overall and these type of rankings. So your thoughts on those 3 quarterbacks overall?
Yeah, I mean, I don't care if he's a top 2 pick. Like, I would care if he's going to be a top 10 pick. If he fell out of the top 10, I'd start to get a little more nervous. If he fell out of the top 20, then I'd definitely be more nervous. That's when you start to get to a range of quarterbacks where, like, teams don't feel as committed to them. They can sit them down for years in, like, Jordan Love's case, or move on very quickly. So, from Dynasty perspective, you worry there, but you'd also worry in Superflex best ball, because it's like, how quickly is he going to see the field? I think as the number 3 or 4 overall pick, which seems like the most likely that he'd land in one of those 2 spots right now, especially if it's the Colts. I mean, if the Colts trade up 1 spot and grab him, or just sit tight and grab him, I mean, he's a top 5 NFL pick who's got incredible rushing upside, and he's got a big arm. I know everyone talks about the accuracy, which is like legit not good, but he attempts deep passes. Like, I don't care. Do you play in completion percentage leagues? Because I don't. Like, I don't think it's going to matter that much if he's out there starting. And I think that the Colts especially give him a chance to start a lot of games. I do think you want to be drafting him with the mindset of, like, he may not be starting for me very early, but there's guys in these super flex drafts that go late, like a Desmond Ritter's going to be starting in the beginning of the season, so if you compare him with Richardson, something like that, I think that's pretty effective. And Richardson as a late season starter with top 5 NFL draft capital behind him, I think he's a very good chance that he would be starting games by the end of the season. And he's going to give you a lot of upside in the money weeks of these tournaments.
In terms of rushing equity for Richardson, 8.1 carries, 55.5 yards per game the last 2 seasons on the ground. Moving on to the second tier, short and sweet. Jackson Smith-Njigba as your wide receiver 1, who I still believe is he's going to be fine, but he's a product of an underwhelming class at wide receiver. Even though the one thing that gives me pause for perhaps breaking out as an elite player is the fact that over the years, not just this offseason, over the years, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Jameson Williams, and Marvin Harrison have all been asked who their best teammate they've played with is, and they all say Jackson Smith-Njigba. So that has to tell you something, that players with significantly better profiles than him are also touting his name. But more importantly, Jahmyr Gibbs, your RB2 overall in this second tier. And I want to get your outlook on Gibbs because not only is your RB2 in this tier, you had the bravado to put him in your rankings a full 2 tiers ahead of the next running back, Zach Charbonnet, here.
Yeah, maybe I should move Charbonnet up a tier. He probably belongs in tier 3.
We're adjusting the rankings literally live on the fly. I like
it. All it took was that little pushback up and go, sure, he's in tier 3. Because I actually like Charbonnet a lot. I've drafted him a bunch, and I don't feel like, so these are for the tiers you're reading off are for Dynasty is kind of the mind that I have them in. I think for best ball that you could argue that Charbonnet really should be in the same tier as Gibbs for this year. Because I think with Gibbs, what he gives you, I think he has superstar potential if used enough as a rusher. And, ends up with a non-mobile quarterback and a team that throws to the running back. If he lands there, like, he could be awesome. His receiving profile is great. He's a really good athlete. He's big enough, 199. Like, if he, gets used as the receiver that we know he can be, yeah, he's not Alvin Kamara. He's 15 pounds lighter than Kamara. But, I think you're looking at, like, maybe a better version of DeAndre Swift. Or like kind of the version of CJ Spiller that we thought we were going to get. But it's more receiving instead of, they don't need to give him carries till he pukes, as they famously said they were going to do with Spiller and then didn't. But as long as he gets enough receiving work, I think his upside is really, really awesome. But I do think with Gibbs, the most likely outcome for this year is that he's going to be kind of a committee back. Mm-hmm. He's going to have like a solid season. And then we're heading into next year going, okay, are we going to get the massive breakout? And that's what we're betting on. I don't feel as good about him coming in and like commanding and a ton of carries and taking over backfield. I think Charbonnet could. If he gets second round draft capital and a team's like, you're the guy, I think he's going to be capable of that. So I've actually taken a lot of Charbonnet in the 8th, 9th round of the big board because he does. I mean, he's capable at everything, and the draft capital seems to be there to an extent. I don't think he's going to fall to the 5th round or something. Maybe he goes early 4th, but he's probably a 2nd or 3rd round pick. And he does kind of have a really strong like rookie profile, I think.
I think he does have a down profile that is probably better in NFL minds than Jahmyr Gibbs. That's just me though, because Sean Payton, although the Broncos don't have their first pick due to the Russell Wilson trade until the 3rd round, even Payton has like personally mentioned Jahmyr Gibbs as someone he's very high on. Moving on to the 3rd tier though, Will Levis, the QB4, and then Jordan Addison and Quentin Johnson in that order. The 3 wide receivers we mentioned so far, JSN included, being the favorites to land first-round draft capital on night 1. So now we can talk about JSN and Jordan Addison and Quentin Johnson because Addison is still Daniel Jeremiah's number 1 overall wide receiver, number 9 overall, ahead of JSN. But myself, other fantasy minds, you all have JSN over Addison. So your thoughts on parsing between those 3 wide receivers?
Yeah, I think JSN, he gets dinged as kind of like a slot guy, and he did play like, basically completely out of the slot in college, but he was playing with Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson. So, I think that probably factored in to an extent because it's like we did this kind of with Justin Jefferson where it's like, oh, he's playing in the slot. Is he going to be able to play outside? It's like, yeah, he's going to be able to play outside. He's really good. I think the same with Jackson Smith-Njigba, who's 196 pounds. So like when you talk about Josh Downs, who's 171 pounds and was used on underneath stuff, I am worried that he's just a slot guy. I'm not that worried that Smith-Njigba is just a slot guy. I think he might be a slot guy in the same way CeeDee Lamb was in his rookie year. He played over 90% of his snaps in the slot as a rookie. He played over 60% of his snaps in the slot last year, CeeDee Lamb. So I think that he can be kind of in that archetype as an NFL player. He probably, I think very likely probably will play the majority of his snaps in the slot long term, and especially as a rookie. But I was looking, Hayden Winks had a mock draft out where he had him going to the Patriots. And I think people would freak out if he went to the Patriots because you're looking, they were so bad last year on offense. But I actually think like him in the Jacoby Myers role would be pretty cool because he's like, Myers played a lot in the slot, but he didn't leave the field in 2 wide receiver sets. He's still playing on the outside. So I think that's the role that I would actually want for Smith and Jigba, and he'd be able to command a lot of volume on an offense like that. I think the upside for him is that he's just going to have like an awesome targets per route run, that he's just going to command targets, and he's not going to leave the field even though he's, a slot guy, because he's good enough to be out on the field on 2 wide receiver sets. And I don't know, I'm a little more bullish on his profile, I think, than you are. I think he has a pretty strong profile. We only got the 1 season, but it was a hell of a season. The teammate competition is off the charts. We did get new information on those teammates. They're both stars at the NFL level. So the fact that he was like kind of keeping pace with those guys while, he was a year younger than Wilson in school and 2 years earlier in the program than Olave, I think is super impressive. So to me, he's just kind of like, he's the most like can't miss of these guys. And the can't miss guys without ceiling have like really burned us on ceiling recently, right? Garrett Wilson was can't miss, but I don't know if he has a ceiling. Boom, hits. And he hits big. Justin Jefferson was the exact same thing. We were like, what's the ceiling really? The ceiling is the best wide receiver in the league. So I don't like if the guys can't miss, I'm done questioning the ceiling. I think he's not quite can't miss Smith and Jigba, but he's definitely the most can't miss of these 3. Addison I have second because, again, I just feel like I'm pretty sure he's good. He did a lot of things to make me feel like, yeah, this guy's good. He's definitely I'm a little more concerned with the size with him. Mm-hmm. I think he's probably like, maybe going to be like a long-term number 2 in, the kind of Emmanuel Sanders mold or like the Devontae Smith mold. But Smith is like kind of not a 2. He's like a 1B. Sanders in his best years was like a 1B. And I think he's got that kind of thing where he's going to be like, if he went to the Vikings, I would feel much better about him on the Vikings being this incredible 1B to Jefferson's 1A than I would about Smith and Jigba. Like Smith and Jigba, I would just want to go somewhere and have him soak up all the targets. Addison, I think, can really operate as a downfield guy who is making an offense better.
And before you dive into Johnston's role and profile, I do think it's interesting that he's basically bizarro JSN, where like JSN exclusively played from the slot. Quentin Johnston exclusively played from the boundary. Even last year, 820 of his 891 snaps, as Josh Norris noted on the Underdog Show, came at right wide receiver. Not to mention that, like Chase Claypool, right? Like we look at Chase Claypool's size and explosiveness and say, okay, like this guy, he can battle downfield and that's where he's going to do his best. But I remember even going into redraft season last year, the issue that everyone was citing incorrectly is that Chase Claypool can't catch downfield. Like he has a 30% contested catch rate for a reason. Everyone tried to attribute that to Ben Roethlisberger, but then that didn't shed light to Claypool's career problems at an NFL level. And that's my concern with Johnston, honestly. The fact that Pro Football Focus charted him last year with just 8 catches on 23 contested catch situations at 6'3", 208. Yes, a 4.5 40 at 6'3", 208 is super impressive. That's great for his size. But at the same time, like if you're not doing what your profile suggests at a collegiate level, of course that makes me a little concerned. But also, we're expecting him to get first-round capital. So curious to get your thoughts on that because that's kind of where I'm at right now whenever I see him in Superflex drafts.
I think so. In the big board, I have a lot of Johnston because he was going at a pretty big discount to JSN, and it's like, he's a downfield guy. He showed off a lot of yak, but on downfield targets, which I really like. That's kind of the Brandon Ayuk thing, where it's like you add after the catch, but you don't have to be, used on screens and kind of underneath gimmicky stuff. It's like this guy adds on the after the catch, because once he gets going downfield, then he can take it to the house. So I like that a lot with Johnston. I think, spike week upside and best ball for sure. I think in Dynasty, and just, the reason I'm not like all in on him, and the reason I have him wide receiver 3 here is that I worry a lot about the contested catch stuff as well. He also had a lot of contested targets. And the worry here is like, does this guy separate downfield? And if he doesn't separate downfield and he's not good at contested catch situations in college, then he might be pretty bad at it in the pros. And the guys who came up, like he had kind of similar concerns in the combination of a lot of contested targets and not a good contested catch rate. Guys like that are Denzel Mims and JJ Arcega-Whiteside and like Terrace Marshall and all these guys who have like busted hard. I think, you can compare him to T. Higgins, who also didn't have a ton. He also had a lot of contested targets, but Higgins was awesome in contested catch situations, has been awesome in contested catch situations as a pro. And I think you would say still like the weakness of his game is that he doesn't get like a ton of separation, but it doesn't really matter because he's so good at the catch point. So that's the part that worries me with Johnston. But like maybe that just means he ends up being more of an intermediate guy, and they get him going on like, crossers and stuff and get him up to speed. And then that yak ability comes into play more. I don't know, but he does feel pretty boom bust to me. And I don't know. I mean, like in Dynasty, we often want to swing for the fences, and I think it makes sense to in some cases for sure. But like when you hit on a wide receiver, that wide receiver becomes very valuable. Like when you hit on Elijah Moore after his rookie season, everyone forgot that he weighed less than 180 pounds and, might only be a slot guy. Mm-hmm. Everyone was like, I'm in. This guy looks awesome. And like, I think Addison gives you a pretty good sell high window, frankly, after his rookie season. If Johnson struggles as a rookie, like you better hope he's good.
In our 4th tier, we have your first tight end, Michael Mayer. Not only tight end 1, but 12 spots ahead of the next tight end, Darnell Washington, and a full tier above him in your rankings. So let's discuss the difference in Mayer to Darnell Washington. Basically, what separates Mayer from the others?
Production. He's just super productive. Even compared to like Cole Kmet, who also went to Notre Dame, and, it's been solid. He's just like way more productive than Kmet. And my thing with tight ends is like, I love the athleticism. I think athleticism matters more at tight end than wide receiver. We've generally seen the guys who are going to be awesome elite tight end producers in fantasy are often very, very good athletes. But sometimes, like in case of Mark Andrews, they're just good enough, and then they're great receivers, because we're looking for this weird thing in fantasy where it's like we basically want a guy who's playing wide receiver but at a position that isn't wide receiver, and there's not many of those guys like on the planet. So it's like it's very tough to find good tight ends. But Mayer does give us a profile. He's going to probably get first round draft capital, super productive receiver, and he didn't crush the combine, but he looks athletic enough. He's not Darnell Washington, who's just an insane athlete and a giant man, but he feels like more, it's not like as exciting. He's kind of more in like the Jason Witten mold, or like the Greg Olsen mold, or the Zach Ertz mold, or the Mark Andrews mold. I'm talking about Michael Mayer. Like those guys, they're good enough in terms of their athleticism, but they're like legit receivers. That's the way Mayer profiles to me. Washington, I think, is more like Jelani Woods or something, where it's pretty enticing. And then you see Woods out there last year and you're like, yeah, this could be really fun. If he gets like all the snaps, he could be really fun for fantasy. But you have to take this leap of faith that a team will even use him as a receiver, because he didn't really get used much as a receiver in college.
Washington, a 4.6, 440, and 16.2 collegiate yards per catch at 6'7", 264. Just an absolute wagon. Yeah. Also, rounding out your 4th tier, 3 receivers, Zay Flowers, Jalen Hyatt, and Josh Downs. As Dave good fan of 4for4, mentions in the chat. Matt Harmon, also fan of 4for4, friend of the show, said that Josh Downs is at the top of contested catches. And yes, last year, Josh Downs did catch 13 of 18 contested catch situations. So plays much bigger than his size suggests. And that's kind of the analogy for these three players in Flowers and Hyatt, because all of them do one thing really well, but they lack severely at other situations in their profile. So go ahead and dive into these three players too.
Yeah. So Downs and Hyatt have pretty similar like concerns at the high level, which is that they both were slot guys.
Mm-hmm.
But for Downs, my concern is that he might just be I think Downs is playing in the slot as a pro. I don't know about Hyatt. I think he might have to go to the outside. For Downs, I'm just worried it's going to be kind of underneath stuff. He was used on kind of a lot of gadgety stuff, like screens, really short passes. Didn't have a ton of yards after catch on deep throws. So, and he's really small, 171 pounds, and he was used like completely out of the slot. That to me is like a pretty concerning profile when you think about upside, because I do care about guys being slot receivers if it means they're only out there for 75% of the routes. That just completely caps your upside. So like, I made the argument with JSN, who cares? Because I think at 196, given his pedigree, he's going to play on the outside in two wide receiver sets. I don't feel that about Downs. I don't think he's out there in two wide receiver sets, most likely. And then it's like, what are you really getting? It's been interesting that he's going ahead. His ADP's higher in underdog drafts than he is in FFPC drafts, which is, half point PPR versus full point PPR. That makes no sense to me. I think Downs is a full point PPR play. That's, I think pretty clearly that kind of archetype. Hyatt is tough because he played in the slot, but he ran a ton of go routes, and he's also small, and he's probably going to be playing on the outside in most systems, and he didn't really do that at all. And he's also not like that fast. Like he's not like Tyquan Thornton, sub 4.340. He ran a 4.440, which is obviously fast, but like he's not going to just completely blow by corners. So I'm like, has he really shown us that he can do the thing he's going to be asked to do, which is play outside, and beat corners? Because you're playing in the slot, right? Like there's like he just ran. He's like free release, like just running downfield straight. I don't know.
You have to step back and really, as you said, ask yourself, how often are the deep threats in an NFL offense coming from the slot, right? How often do they send the slot route on a go route? And then also, you have to say, why did Jalen Hyatt wait until Cedric Tillman went down to break out? So he had to remove someone else from a collegiate offense for Hyatt to basically do anything. And then also, yes, Hyatt does offer value in best ball, in my opinion. And again, these are tight end premium, Superflex, Dynasty rankings. But I also think everyone is doing themselves a disservice in life in general if they don't take in any kind of information and then ask yourself, how else do I use this in what I do? And so I take this and say, oh, well, like these players are value because this is like Dynasty ADP, thus their values in Superflex drafts on FFPC and underdog. And for Hyatt, I'll still take him in a best ball draft because, in my opinion, you're never going to get the redraft start right. You're never going to start him correctly because he's going to be a Nelson Aguilar boom or bust type of player.
Yeah, I think that's right. And the other reason to take him, and I've taken him in best ball too, is that what if he goes to the Bills? If he goes to the Bills, I'm in, because he might run out of the slot, and he
does kind of profiles Deontay Hardy too, so like it'd make a lot of sense if he goes to the Bills.
Yeah, so I'm in if he goes to the Bills, because I think like he's an early declare. He broke out in his third season, his true junior season. Like that is a high upside profile, even though he is undersized. Like could he be like Will Fuller, but he's getting a couple years to develop out of the slot. Eventually maybe he is playing more on the outside in year 2 or 3. But as a rookie, they were like, yeah, we're running 4 wide. Josh Allen's going to hit you deep, run as fast as you can. And it's like a ton of fun. I could totally see that. I think, if he goes to the Chiefs, obviously we'd get Mahomes, but I think they're very creative. If he goes to one of these teams that's like, we're a little bit worried about, like if he goes to the Cowboys, I think he's done. Like right there. Like I'm like, nope, it's it. I'm sorry it didn't happen. But they're gonna just slot him in like, you play this position, here's your route tree, you're gonna do it every time. I don't want that for Hyatt, where he's just like kind of a classic outside wide receiver. I think he's got a very low floor in those types of situations.
Speaking of parsing through information and getting the most out of life, the fifth tier is really what I consider to be your running back tier, the fifth of 6 tiers, I should say. And it starts at the top with Israel Abinakanda. And then we go to Tank Bigsby, Kendry Miller, Devin Achane, Sean Tucker, Tajay Spears, Roshan Johnson, in that order. So let's start at the top with Abinakanda, because I'm curious what separates him from the rest of this bunch in your mind, since that's not the consensus opinion.
Yeah, so to me, it's like there's a big group of running backs after Charbonnet in this class, and
Absolutely.
I think we're all trying to figure out, how do we parse these guys from one another, what differentiates them. And I think in a lot of cases we've been saying, like, basically buzz, Senior Bowl buzz, I think has helped push Tajay Spears up. Draft capital is why, I think Devin Achane has been kind of ahead of the group generally. And I think those are as good of reasons as any. But Abanikanda just crushed his pro day. And now, according to relative athletic scores, is the most athletic running back in this class. I mean, that's on my radar, and I'm hopeful that it's going to boost him up a bunch of NFL draft boards. I think it should. He's also 20 years old. He doesn't turn 21 until October. So he has this profile where, like, as a freshman, not that great, didn't do much. As a sophomore, didn't do a ton. But he was 17 years old for the first 3 games. He played 6 games as a freshman. He was 17 years old for half of them. I mean, the guy's crazy young. And then, in his 19/20 season, has an incredible year and shows off this really strong breakaway potential. So he's kind of that's like, if you're betting on him, it's kind of like a Raheem Mostert type of player, where you're hoping, he goes to a system. I think it'd be awesome. And like, I don't know. I'm not a film guy, so I don't know maybe if he's got the decision making or whatever to like really crush in a Shanahan system. But when I see him get up to speed, I'm like, that seems fun in a one cut system. The other thing that I like about him is he's 216, and he showed sufficient pass catching ability. He actually had a higher yards per route run over his career than Zach Charbonnet. He had he's higher than Tank Bigsby. He's higher than Roshan Johnson. These are guys that we look at and we're like, you can be a 3-down guy if a team gives you the chance to be. And I think Abanikanda is in that same mold, but he's the most athletic. I mean, he's much more athletic than Bigsby. We don't know about Kendry Miller's athleticism yet, but, I think Abanikanda is probably more athletic than him, more athletic than Charbonnet. He's more athletic than everybody because, he's the most athletic running back in the class. He's slightly more athletic than Bijan Robinson, and he's 1 pound heavier. So I don't know. I guess we'll have to see if NFL teams really buy in to the pro day numbers, because, previously he'd been seen kind of as like maybe a 4th or 5th round type. But when you have a workout that good, it feels to me like he really should be moving into like the 3rd round conversation. And as a 3rd round pick, I like him a lot more than Devin Achane. I like Abanikanda a lot more than Achane, even if he goes around later, as long as it's 2nd and 3rd round, as long as we get that sufficient draft capital for Abanikanda, because Achane's 188 pounds, and he's not like an amazing receiver the way that Jahmyr Gibbs is. He's a competent receiver. He's a better receiver, in terms of his efficiency than Abanikanda, but not like that much better. And it's like, how much is this guy even going to be on the field? So I've just gotten to the point where at first I was like, you know what? I'm betting on the draft capital. I'm taking Achane. This is a pretty big discount to get on a guy who could be a 2nd round pick. But now I'm starting to feel like, you know what? I'm confident enough in Abanikanda and Bigsby and Miller that these guys can be really, really good if a team gives them enough touches. And they profile pretty similarly to Zach Charbonnet in that way, that it's like, if a team just decides, yeah, this is working, they can probably do everything. Now they could be like Chuba Hubbard types who are basically like really competent backups, but I don't know. I'm starting to struggle to see like what Achane's ceiling is, especially as a rookie.
One, let the record show, and you can check my Google history, I did do my job as a professional analyst and Google how to pronounce Israel Abanikanda before the show. Having said that, the Google voice also told me Abanikanda. So if I have it incorrect, that's fine. I should have gone to ChatGPT and give it more information to eventually enslave us.
Well,
Also,
here's what you do. So I'm
yeah.
a big guy. Go watch the highlights. I don't watch the film, the silent film that gives you. Listen, if you watch the highlights, if you watch Just Bomb Productions, sick edits, go to YouTube, watch the highlights. You get the announcer in your ear.
That's wise. Because
Like,
I
there you go.
am a big, like, take pride in my job, look up the name pronouncing beforehand. I might enunciate, I might even say that wrong. A lot of other words, but names I at least try to get correct all the time.
Yeah.
But I blame Google for that one. Also, I'm curious, since you already discussed the plummeting of A-Chain in your rankings, where did you have him before? Just ahead of those three, Bigsby, Kendry Miller, and Israel, or in another tier ahead of them?
I can't remember now. I may have had him in another. I don't think I had him in another tier, but had him ahead
at first
of all of them.
At first glance, it is sexy. Like, we not only got the elite 99th percentile 40 time at his size, but 21 rushing touchdowns in the SEC the last 2 years to go with 2.7 catches per game. So I too, when you first look at it, say, okay, like this player, especially if we somehow get some sneaky like round 3 capital in the right system, of course can explode for ceiling performances.
Yeah, and I think in a good, like in a smart offense, he can be pretty interesting for sure. The issue that I started, the more I dug in, was actually the receiving that got me really nervous, because I think he kind of profiles more like a Tevin Coleman than, one of these guys who's gonna come in and, be awesome in a part-time role, like an Aaron Jones or something. Like, I think he's more like a complementary speed back than a natural third down specialist who then kind of takes over more and more of the backfield. Not that he's a bad receiver. He's not, but he's not an off the charts good receiver. And so what he does really well is breakaway rushing. He's more like Tyler Ervin or something, where he's like this incredible kick returner as well. But, he's like a get him up to speed as a rusher type of guy, at least in college. Now, he was a competent receiver, and it's certainly possible that he ends up being an awesome NFL receiver. But I started to just like get, like Tevin Coleman had some pretty good weeks for sure and some okay seasons. I think that it's not a terrible outcome, but I just wanted to, I think like at a certain point, like I just want to swing for the fences a little bit more in this range of the draft, and go for guys who you could like hit a home run with, because these picks aren't that valuable in Dynasty, and they're not that valuable in best ball either. And, Bigsby, Miller, Abanikanda, they could all go in the third round. Not probably all together go, but they all have good chances of going in the third round. And as third round picks, they all have 3 down potential. They all have like enough receiving. They're all big enough where you could just see them be like the lead back for one of these teams. You're going to hit kind of a 7th, 8th round best ball value in like the 16th round. That's like really enticing to me. I think A-Chain, you're going to get more of like a 10th or 11th round value in the 15th, which is fine, but it's not quite as exciting.
And more importantly, if we both are projecting this group of running backs to potentially go in the 3rd, 4th round, again, speaking on extrapolating information, Kendry Miller continues to go in the last 2 rounds of drafts on Underdog right now, which is absolutely insane, considering you can get him for your RB 6 or 7, 4 to 5 rounds behind the others that we're expecting to have the same draft capital. So something to keep in mind as you're drafting out there. Also in this tier, though, is where the tight end rankings come into play. And I want to get your thoughts on the 2 below Darnell Washington, since we already talked about him, and Sam Laporta and Dalton Kincaid. And in particular, Kincaid, since it's him who's arguably expected to have better capital than any other tight end in this class, since he recently landed as Daniel Jeremiah's not only tight end 1, but the number 11 overall player in this draft.
Kincaid?
Yeah.
Kincaid's really old. And so I'm just like, I think maybe I'm a little too low on Kincaid, but I'm like a big fan of Sam Laporta. I think Sam Laporta is really strong. He's really strong after the catch. And I think flashed that kind of, I'm looking at tight end. I want to see like what do you do like as a receiver, right? So Mayer, very, very productive, which obviously I'm like, okay, you just have like a lot of good receiving skills to be able to do that. Darnell Washington, massive human being, going to be able to catch a lot of touchdowns, hopefully. Sam Laporta has the ability to win after the catch in a way that I think is potentially special at the tight end position. And so that just kind of keeps me a little higher on him than Kincaid, even with the draft capital discrepancy, because Laporta's, people seem to like him. So I don't think he's going to go to, in the 5th or the 6th round, more like probably the 2nd to the 4th range. And, with that kind of draft capital, I'm pretty in. Draft capital's it hasn't been as important at the tight end position when we're looking at guys emerging as superstars. And like at tight ends, we're like, who cares if they don't? Because it's basically because then just draft Taysom Hill, like most of these non-superstars don't really do much for you anyway. So it's more about me being really high on Sam Laporta and his potential after the catch than being low on Dalton Kincaid. But if, the reason I'm not quite as excited is it comes down to age. And, he was okay in terms of his like receiving profile for sure, but he doesn't he has a 10.6 career ADOT. In his really strong 2022, he had an 8.7 ADOT. So I'm worried maybe he's just more of a kind of a classic, like underneath tight end outlet guy. And that's just never as exciting to me. It's like kind of a Trey McBride type of situation, maybe. So
Laporta makes me higher on Kirk Ferentz, since like his tight ends coaching tree at Iowa is basically a Belichickian coaching tree, since we had George Kittle and then TJ Hawkinson, and now Laporta, who, as you said, is an elite athlete.
Yeah, and so get him to the Seahawks so he can fix Noah Fant. We need to finish developing Noah Fant.
And finally, your tier 6 includes a long group of names. I urge everyone to go check out the rankings and read them themselves at Legendary Upside. But are there one or two among this group who stand out as players that you have confidence in that could perhaps deliver, even if it's just a couple starts, actual like value for us in year 1 as rookies?
Yeah, at the very end, I'd say, Dwayne McBride, I'm going to have him as kind
Absolutely. Last round pick in every single draft, and it's crazy.
Yeah, it really is crazy because he's before we started, we were talking about him a little bit, and you were saying like he is not going to pop for any of the numbers guys because this is not an exaggeration. He had 5 career catches in college. Okay, he played 30 games. He had 30 games. He had 5 career catches. So, but that, you don't need to actually use anything advanced. That's a simple stat. I think that's going to resonate with everybody. You don't need to be diving too into the numbers to go, oh, I don't like that. What I think the advanced numbers do show, though, is that as a rusher, he was awesome. He was really strong. The one reservation that I have with McBride, the biggest reservation I have, actually, it wouldn't, I would say, be the receiving. It's the athleticism, because when you watch the highlights, and I do recommend watching the highlights. You get the announcers, you get some cool music. You don't get any cool music when you're all 22. You just don't get that. But when you watch the highlights, you see him track down from behind frequently. These are the highlights. These are the best plays he's got. He's getting tackled from behind like a lot. So I'm a little worried he's like Kadeem Carey. It's
that's important too, because the reason, in my opinion, Kendry Miller and Dwayne McBride are seeing their values plummet are solely because they got injured late in the year and thus were not available to test. And so if they can't test, you would think, okay, and McBride leading this class in 10+ yard runs last year in his final season in college, you would say, okay, he's an explosive, fast player. But then you watch the tape and he's getting caught from behind. You're thinking, oh, well, actually, if we had tested, maybe his stock goes even lower, honestly.
Yeah, that's the concern. But I think at a 4.65 or a 4.6, I am psyched about Dwayne McBride because I don't think he's not fast. His top speed sucks, but how bad does it suck? That's the question. Because if it's 4.7 plus, he's not an NFL player. But if he's 4.65, he is. And his acceleration, I think very clearly is very good. right? So the type of guy you're getting, it's Dameon Pierce. That's who we're hoping he is. We're hoping he's Dameon Pierce but a worse receiver. But like Dameon Pierce's acceleration is awesome, and he makes people miss at will. That's what McBride did in college. He made people miss at will. His elusiveness, crazy good. The stat you just pointed to shows burst. I think there's no real question that he has that initial burst. It's like, is his long speed basically anywhere near where it needs to be for an NFL team to lean on him at all? Gus Edwards is another type of guy, archetype wise, I think you can think about. But like Gus Edwards is actually pretty fun as a rookie. Eventually, he gets replaced as the lead back. But like in the last round of best ball drafts, McBride, I think, makes a ton of sense, especially in half point PPR. I mean, this guy, he's potentially like racking up chunk gains, right? He's not taking stuff to the house very much, maybe never, but he's going to, potentially rack up a lot of like 10, 15-yard runs. And I think he'll also be pretty good around the goal line. So if he goes to a depth chart that really needs a bigger back, I think he could be really fun. Again, you do have to, I don't think you want to go all in because like he might not just be an NFL guy with the speed.
The police are coming for your takes. And I am curious to get your thoughts on, because I know you were about to mention someone else who could perhaps deliver value in year one as a very late round selection in both Dynasty and best ball drafts ongoing.
Wait, sorry, who?
I thought you were about to mention someone else, a second player from this tier 6.
Oh, so the guy, let me cheat and go up one more tier and just talk about Marvin Mims, who's in tier 5. And I think he's someone that Scott Barrett actually just had a thread on him, really hyping him up. So maybe you'll start to see him move up a bit in drafts. But he's been someone I've been taking a lot late in drafts. Zach Kruger's actually been on him like since before he tested at the combine. We did like a really early best ball draft together. He got us on him in like the last round.
I think it's the water at NBC in Stanford, because also very good friend. His name slips my mind now. I'm so sorry. Was on the show, NBC Sports College. Eric Froton. Sorry, Froton.
Oh, Froton.
He was on the show. Yeah,
nice.
Eric Froton. He was texting me all weekend at WrestleMania too. Sorry, Froton, about that. Yeah, Froton also very high on Marvin Mims as well.
All right, there you go. I mean, so he's a guy that if you look at a 30% breakout threshold, for breakout age, never broke out, but he got like pretty close. And he did it 1 year where he got above 30% in yards, and then another year where he got over 30% in touchdowns. So he like did the things, he just never put them together. You want to see, an average of those two stats over 30% is technically the 30% breakout. But like he was not super productive. He was solidly productive over the course of his entire career. He was efficient. He's sufficiently, I think he's got enough size. He's 183 pounds where he can play on the outside. And he's pretty fast, sub 4.40, and he was awesome downfield in college. So it's like he has a thing he does. I think an NFL team, they're going to be bringing him in to be a downfield threat for them. Again, kind of the best ball archetype. I also think that there's a chance he's like a second or third round pick. I mean, I'm really hoping he's a third round pick. There's a chance that he goes into the second round. I've seen a little bit of that. He seems more likely to be a third round pick. The concern with him would be that I'm completely off on that and he falls to the fourth round. And draft capital is so important at wide receiver. I think it's way more important than at running back and at tight end. It's just a lot harder for guys to emerge out of, round 4 or 5. We've seen it with Amon-Ra St. Brown, Stefon Diggs. You do see it, but it's not all that common. Much more common at running back. So the draft capital makes him a little tougher to be like completely in on, but he's one of these guys where if he was, I'm not quite as high on him as Scott, who was saying like he would basically be, I think his clear-cut wide receiver 2 or something with sufficient draft capital, but as like a first round pick, he is in the mix with the other wide receivers in the class for me. I think I'd probably still have him behind like Addison, but I might have him ahead of Johnston if he was a first round pick. Now he won't be a first round pick, but it's like that kind of profile on paper that like I'm like just hoping the NFL likes him a little bit more than they seem to right now, because he does does have, I think, a really strong profile.
A lot of wise people on Marvin Mims ahead of the NFL draft. Corain, tell everyone what else they can find on the new site.
Yeah, so I just had a post on Izzy Abanikanda and the other 6 running backs who I have in that big tier that we talked about that are basically kind of second-round rookie picks, those types of guys. I'm working on a wide receiver article that'll have Mims as the cover boy there. If you are the type of person who prefers to listen to things, I also have, if you sign up, there's a premium podcast feed where I narrate these posts and I read them, as I throw a little emphasis in there. It's fun. It's fun listen. So that's kind of how I am. I really prefer to listen to things. Like I listen to Gretch's Stealing Signals. I listen to a robot lady read me that as I read along. That's just how I am. I'm very audio focused. So if you're like that, recommend signing up, getting the premium podcast feed going. And then I also have a regular podcast. I'm going to have Travis May on that Legendary Upside podcast. You can find that wherever you listen to podcasts. I'll have Travis May from Mojo on this week. We're going to be doing some deep dives into the prospects there. And I think we're going to get a lot into Anthony Richardson because Travis is pretty concerned about his accuracy. So we'll have maybe a little debate about him.
I am a subscriber, and I suggest everyone become one as well. We will be back next week with more information. Until then, everything, remember, free on the site. We have best ball rookie roundtables going on at the site as well. So until next week, till then, remember, be a little bit kinder than what's required. We'll see you next time.